Hello and welcome to another physical activity quick play. I am Lisa Workman and you are in the right place. If we haven't met before, I am a qualified exercise professional, both a clinical exercise physiologist and kinesiologist. Been doing this for over 22 years, and I am all about helping people move their bodies better and more. And so this is the second part of our three-part series, or at least I think it'll be three parts, on muscle action. So if you haven't watched the part one of the videos, I have dropped the link down in the description box. So be sure to go over there and watch that video first before you jump onto this part two. So our lesson for today is, again, all about muscle actions. But we're going to dissect these muscle actions a little bit more because they're not all equal. There are some significant differences between our muscle actions. So this kind of loops back to the fact that the force that the muscle can generate is different within each muscle action, as well as the energy requirements. So we'll get into that in just a moment. But first, let's take a good look at our chest muscle, and our shoulder muscle will vanish here shortly. We know that this contraction and shortening of those muscle fibers is a concentric contraction, kind of something that you are very used to doing all the time is a concentric contraction. So let's jump into just briefly a reminder. What is a concentric contraction? This is a shortening of the muscle fibers, typically to generate motion or movement. And the muscle attachments that are on the bones actually move towards each other. So you would expect to see a bicep curl. So the muscle in the front of the arm is the bicep. The elbow is bending and the hand is coming up towards the shoulder. This is considered a concentric shortening action of the muscle. We move into the eccentric muscle action, and we're looking at the lengthening of the muscle fiber. So almost like the complete opposite, because we're using our muscles to resist or slow down motion. And our muscle attachments on the bones are moving away from one another. It's really easy to label eccentric as a contraction, but truly it isn't. It's a lengthening of those muscle fibers. And so here she's pulling down the band. There's your concentric phase. And as she lifts her hands overhead with the band, that is the eccentric. So she's changing the speed. She's changing the load by lifting the arms back up. And we're taking those muscle attachments farther away from each other. And then finally, the isometric muscle action, we're looking at producing shock absorption and maintaining stability around a joint. So the muscle attachments do not move relative to each other. It's actually a standoff between the external load and the internal force because it's about equal. So we know that that is there to maintain. So in your mind, you might think of an isometric plank. This is where the muscle fibers of the abdominal wall and the core are in engagement, but they're not necessarily shortening or lengthening. So that's in review. What else is different? Well, there's lots, my friends. There's lots of differences here. So Radek in 2018 brought forward this great and well-described table. So I'm going to share it with you here today. If we look at the table headings, we're looking at a couple things. The relationship between the internal force and the external load. We're also looking at, in this type of muscle action, the force that's produced, and is it close to maximal force, as well as we're looking at the relationship to the energy expenditure required for that muscle action. So starting off here, we've got concentric, again, probably the one you're most familiar with that you do in your workouts. So when we look at the relationship between internal force and external load, we see that the force of the muscle is greater than the load that is put on the muscle. So that is why the shortening happens, is because we know that the muscle has more force. Is this maximal force? No, not at all. It's not maximal force. We are lifting that load, but it's not the maximum amount that the muscle fiber could do. Is it close? It could be, but depending on the load that you choose. But in terms of doing a set of, 10 to 15 repetitions, is definitely not in the maximal force of the muscle realm. When it comes to energy expenditure, we know that we're shortening that muscle and we're taking those microfilaments at the very microscopic level and bringing them together. That requires energy. That requires a lot of energy. And so for a concentric contraction, energy is high. Energy utilization is high. The next type of muscle action we've got here is the isometric. And I put this one in the middle because it's kind of like the one that sits on the fence. It's right in the middle because the internal force and the external load are equal to each other. So then again, those muscle fibers do not really necessarily move the joint. We're not taking our attachment points away or closer to each other. We're actually just holding a fixed muscle tension. So maximal force, not necessarily. It's something that you probably could hold for a period of time. So usually maximal force is shorter. There's less ability for you to do this long term. And energy expenditure is also pretty moderate. So those muscle fibers are not crossing over and causing a contraction and a shortening. Instead, they're staying in the same place. So the energy required isn't as high. And then finally, our eccentric muscle actions. This is where the internal force of the muscle is less than the external load. So remember, we've got a load that we've put on the muscle, and this is where we're trying to slow the motion down. We're putting the muscle into a lengthening position. So this is getting very, very close to maximal force because we are trying our best with our muscle fibers to control that action and that movement. Energy expenditure, super low because those muscle fibers are not shortening. We're not taking those microfilaments and bringing them together. We're actually taking them apart. So the energy to do that is not as high. So lots of information about the 3 different muscle actions. They are quite different. One more little diagram here, and I'll get you oriented here. This is also from Radek 2018. We're looking at 2 variables. So on the vertical axis, we're looking at the contraction speed of your muscle fibers. And on the horizontal, we're looking at what's written there as loading, but I'm going to keep calling it external load. So we have those 2 variables working together. So you can see that each of the 3 muscle actions is actually on the diagram, and we're looking at a concentric muscle action. So we see that speed is higher than 0, so there has to be a certain amount of speed in that muscle action. And our load is also kind of in this sort of moderate range. So it's kind of in that middle of that backwards, or I guess a sort of backwards curve coming down towards the bottom axis. So we look then at the isometric muscle action, and we can see that it is at both of the variables are sort of connecting at the same point. We see contraction speed is quite low, if not at 0, and our external load is really quite high, but there's a balance there. Again, that we have that equal internal force to external load. And then finally, our last muscle action is our eccentric muscle action, and we can see that it is dropping below speed. So it's like a negative speed with really high load. So just like the table previously explains that a little bit more, this is a nice visual depiction of how the muscle actions work in relationship to their contraction speed, which we could look at is force and external load. Alrighty, so our quick play recap. There's lots of information about muscle actions. They aren't all equal. Each of them contribute differently in terms of the internal force that they can produce, as well as the amount of energy that they can utilize while they're doing their muscle actions. Concentric muscle actions, the internal force generated by the muscle is much less than the actual maximum amount that the muscle can generate. And then once that happens, the muscle begins to shorten. In an eccentric muscle action, we're looking at the external force on the muscle is greater than the internal force that the muscle can generate, and that's why it lengthens. So you can't unknow any of this now, my friends. Now it's time for insight to action. So now you have a little bit more about the physiology of these muscle actions. Which type of muscle action do you want to try? Is there any one of these 3 that have intrigued you a little bit more to go, how could I put that into my workout? Is there one type that you don't feel very comfortable with in your workouts and you're like, "Ooh, I don't know about that one"? Go ahead and comment below this video and share what you think. So I'm really curious to know, which of the three are you gravitating towards? Which of the three are you like, I really don't know. I'm not quite sure if I could pull this off in my workout. Do not fret though, there will be a part 3 for sure for this series, and we'll dive in a little bit deeper, but I would love to hear what you think. Now, I love free stuff. Of course, we've got a free resource here. I have built out 9 exercises, 9 isometric exercises that you can do at the wall. Feel free to jump onto that link and pull up that video. It also has access to the handout that describes all 9 exercises with images. And I would be happy to get you started with some isometric exercises via that free resource. Finally, if you want, you are more than welcome to reach out to me here. There's my website here, lisaworkman.com. Of course, some of this stuff is really quite nuanced. And so I'd be more than happy to help you build out a program that includes all these different types of muscle actions to help not only improve your strength, your stability, but also really, truly improve the quality of your life. I am here to support you in your physical activity behavior, helping you move better and move more. Happy exploring.